Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much. I loved being with you that last time, and I hope you'll enjoy my stories today. I'm going to tell you, I've just been watching this series on TV called Band of Brothers. I don't know if any of you saw it. It's about the easy platoon of paratroopers in the Second World War. And oh, and my dad, and that prompted me today to tell you the story about my dad, Carl Henry Carpenter, and his experience in the war. So this is a veteran story. It's a love story. It's a daughter's story. It's a father's story. My father, Carl Henry Carpenter, isn't somebody you're ever going to read about in a book. He never got a medal. He went in a private and he came out a private, and so he's just one of the many soldiers foot soldiers who served in the Second World War. He comes from my hometown, my little tiny hometown of Clayton, New York, which is situated right on the St. Lawrence River in the Thousand Islands area, right where Lake Ontario and the St. Lawrence River open their mouths and give each other a big wet kiss. Back then, Clayton was a mostly agricultural town. My father was drafted when he was 18 years old, and he had never been away from home. He had never seen a winter without snow. He got his milk from the cow, and so you can imagine what life was like when he went away and was stationed in California. So that's a little background for my pop. So here we go. My daddy was in World War II. Went in at 18, came out at 22. Met my mom in California. Both lived a rue and blessed the day. Well, my love affair with your mother, Reg, started a couple of years before I met her. Now, there was a bunch of us guys from Clayton. You know the crew. There was Rory and Milt. There was Pete, Ledoux. There was Sullivan and Tally. And we all decided that we were going to join up in the National Guard. Now, it wasn't because we were trying to be super patriotic. It was mostly because where else could you earn $1 on a Saturday morning just for walking around? That's the way we looked at it. So a bunch of us guys, we walking across town and we're going over to the Chevy station. Now, Cliff Good, he was the captain of the National Guard and he owned the Chevy station. So we get over there and Cliff's got his head underneath the hood of a Chevy. He's fixing a gas line and smoking a cigarette. And I says to him, "Hey, Cliff, you think we could join up in the Guard?" He pulls his head out and kind of looks us up and down and says, "All right." And that was that. See, it wasn't like it is today. See, Cliff, he knew our people. So that Saturday, we all hitchhike a ride to Watertown. That's 20 miles away, next big city. And we start walking around. Cliff puts us through our paces at Armory Square. Up, 2, 3, 4, up, 2, 3, 4. At ease, man. Now, every once in a while, Cliff would shout out, "Bear arms." And we'd roll up our sleeves and show them our biceps because we didn't have any guns. See, we were training with broomsticks. This was before the country went into manufacturing guns. So all we had was broomsticks. So after we were done, we'd just sweep off Armory Square. We'd collect our dollar and we'd take most of it home to our mothers. But when I was 18, I was a senior in high school. Now, I didn't finish high school until after the war. I was a senior, and the National Guard got rolled up into the Army, and I got drafted. And I left home, and they sent me down to Louisiana, and then they sent me out to Arkansas, and then they sent me out to California. California, here I come. It was in California that I was going to meet the person who would change my life. Jimmy Forbes. He was a famous trumpet man from out Chicago way. He had a boogie style that no one else could play. He was the top man at his craft. And then his number came up and he was gone with the draft. He's in the Army now, blowing reveille. He's the boogie woogie bugle boy of Company B. He was some boogie woogie bugle boy of Company B. Oh, Jimmy Forbes. He was a hell of a guy. Now, Jimmy, he had a real way with the women. And one day he comes to me and he says, Carl, I'm going out with these two sisters, and it's a little bit more than I can handle. I was wondering, could you go out with a younger sister for me? And I put my hand over my heart and I said, Jimmy, you know I'd do anything for my country. And I started going out with that younger sister, and whoo, she was fun. She was fun. We were doing all kinds. We were going dancing, going to the movies. Oh, we were having a ball. And then one day she comes to me and she says, Carl, I can't go out with you anymore. And I says, well, why not? Because, I thought things were going pretty good. And she says, well, my husband's coming home from Hawaii next week, and I got to spend some time with him. Go figure. So I tell this to Jimmy. And Jimmy says, oh, Carl, don't even worry about it. There's plenty of fish in this ocean. I'll take care of you. And that's how I met your mother. My mama was just sweet 16. In Bobby's socks, her face was squeaky clean. My daddy fell in love right away. It was 64 years, give or take a day. Well, the first time I laid eyes on your mother, I was under the marquee of the Mask of Zorro with Douglas Fairbanks. And the first time I saw her, I went, bingo! And I knew that she was the one. I knew it. She was the most beautiful girl I had ever seen. She had hair that was wavy. It wasn't as curly as yours, Reg, but it was wavy, and it was like the color of wheat, and it just waved down to her shoulders. And her skin was like porcelain. She looked like a little doll. She's just a little bitty thing. Did you know the first time I put my arms around your mother, my hands went around her waist 2 times? That's true. Of course, I can't do that now, but back then I could. Well, your mother had eyes. I kept staring at them. I couldn't figure out if they were cornflower blue or spring green. And I still don't know. It had to be you. It had to be you. I wandered around and finally found somebody who could make me be true, could make me be blue, and make me be glad just to be sad thinking of you. Well, I tried to spend as much time as I could with your mother. I even went AWOL a couple of times. Now, I was stationed way, way, way upstate, and your mother lived down in Anaheim. So I had to, hitchhike all the way down there if I wanted to spend a little time with your mother. One night, I even spent the night with your mother on the couch next to her mother, Matilda. Well, about now, it was getting on in the war where we were getting word that we were gonna get shipped out. Now, we didn't know if we were gonna go to the Pacific or if we were gonna go to Europe, but I wanted to make sure I could see your mother as much as possible before I had to go. And that night, I spent the night on the couch with your mother. I got up real early the next day and I hitchhiked back up to the base. And we must have gotten word overnight that we were getting shipped out to Hawaii, because everybody, once I got there, they were in full dress uniforms and everything was laid out. And Jimmy had put my stuff in my spot. I got onto the base and I heard my name, Regi Carpenter. And I said, here. I put on my stuff and we went off to Hawaii. Hup. 2, 3, 4, hup, 2, 3, 4. All I could think about was your mother. I'll be seeing you in all the old familiar places. You can sing along with me if you want. That this heart of mine embraces all day through. In that small cafe, the park across the way, the children's carousel, the chestnut tree, the wishing well. Up, 2, 3, 4, up, 2, 3, 4. Well, I marched those beaches of Hawaii carrying that rifle in a full pack for 6 months, and we didn't see a thing. Now that's when my knees started to go. That was the beginning of the end, Reg. Well, one night we got word that we were going to be shipped out to the Philippines. And the whole platoon got onto an airplane. And then we were dropped right into the middle of Luzon. Now, our job was to make all the Japanese go down to the shore where there were a lot more soldiers. So I was a flamethrower, Rich. And what that meant was I had a pack of gasoline and napalm on my back. And see, this was right around the time when they were starting to kind of figure out how the ratio of napalm to gasoline. See, before that, they were taking some risks. And sometimes the napalm, there wouldn't be enough, and so it wouldn't shoot out enough, and it'd kind of blow up in the guy's face. Or sometimes the tank would just kind of blow up on you if you weren't careful with your cigarette. But my job as a flamethrower was to find where the Japanese were in the caves and the trenches, and then I would shoot the flame at them and catch them on fire. And then one of our guys would shoot him. We called that a mercy killing. Well, have you ever met an officer, Reg? Because they were always asking me, Carl, why is it you went into the Army and you were a private, and you came out and you were a private? And I say, have you ever met an officer? They're all idiots. We had this one officer, Well, he was from Texas. And down there they have a saying. There's a 10-gallon hat on a 5-gallon hit. And that's what it was true for me. So one day he tells us that we have to climb up this hill because there's Japanese on the other hill. And we set everything up and then we're going to shoot them. Well, we start, it's noon, and we're going right up this hill. And as we're running up the hill, we're getting shot at. And then this lieutenant, he says to us, retreat, retreat, you know, like we need to be told. And we're running back down the hill. It turns out that he had read the map wrong, and a whole bunch of us guys got killed. I was one of the only guys to make it out of there. You know, I'd never been away from home, Regi. And when they sent me out to Arkansas, I had made friends with this Cherokee, nicest guy. And I watched him get killed right there on that hill. Oh, it was a terrible thing. Well, about now, my knees were starting to go big time. And they'd send me off to the hospital, and then they'd send me back and send me out and send me back. And the whole thing was just a mess. And all of us guys, we were sicker than dogs. We had dysentery, we had malaria, we were sicker than dogs. But this whole time, I had been writing to your mother. And I asked her if she would marry me. And she said yes. And then I wrote my mother. And I told her that Josephine and I were engaged. And would she go to Watertown and buy an engagement ring and send it to Josephine in California? And she did. And then my mother, she wrote me a letter and she said, now, Carl, you make sure you come home now, because you got a lot to look forward to. Well, it was about that time. It's getting near the end of the war. And they said that if you had enough points, you could go home. You had to have 85 points. And I had 85 points. And so I got to go home with a bunch of the other guys. So first they took us over to Hawaii, and I was getting real excited because I thought, now from here, they're going to take us to California, and then I'll be able to go down and see your mother. They were going to take us to the base on Riverside, and then I go back down to see your mother. Well, your mother by now, she was 20 years old. She must have looked completely different. But we got word that all of the guys who lived east of the Mississippi were going to have to get on a boat and go back to the New York City port. And all the guys who lived west of the Mississippi, they were going to get on a train and go home. So we got on this boat. Well, by now, Rich, everything, all the recreational boats had been confiscated and were being used for the war effort. So we didn't get on a regular old Navy boat. We got on this French cruise ship. And whoo, it was beautiful. Stained glass windows and mahogany railings. It was gorgeous. Now, I got the best job of all on that boat, KP. Now, you might not think that's a good job, Reg, but let me tell you why. Oh, sure, I peeled a lot of potatoes, but I got 3 square meals a day, and the other guys only got 2. And I got to sleep up on deck, and the other guys had to sleep in the hole. So who's the idiot? Huh? When the lights go on again, all over the world. And the ships will sail again all over the world. And rain and snow are all that may fall from the skies above. A kiss won't mean goodbye, but hello to love. Well, we sailed into New York port. And right there on the dock were the Gray Ladies. Now, the Gray Ladies were the predecessors of the Red Cross, and they were called the Gray Ladies because they wore these gray aprons. Well, they were standing on the dock, handing all of us guys a little gill of milk. Now, this was the only fresh milk we had had since we went into the Army. And so most of us guys were drinking a couple of them. Well, Mrs. Roosevelt had said that we had to have the savage taken out of us because we were in the Philippines. And you know what that meant. New Jersey. Well, they sent us to have the savage taken out of us in a rehabilitation home in New Jersey. And while we were on that train, Reg, a bunch of us guys got sicker than dogs. We got the backyard trots. I am telling you, I have never drunk fresh milk again. Well, when we got to New Jersey, it turned out that taking the savage out of us just included playing a lot of cards. So we sat around and played cards, and after a while they said we could go home. So they put me on a train back to Watertown where this whole thing got going. My brother Eddard picked me up. Now everybody in Clayton was lining the streets when I came home. And everybody was shouting out, "Hey, Carl, welcome home, Carl, welcome home, welcome back, come on. Good to see you, Carl." It was springtime and the river was just beautiful. I was never so happy to be home in my life. Now, everybody was out at Mother's house. There was Rip and Violet, of course, and Mom and Pop. There was cousin Sally. She was there, and Junior. And Bev was there. But Joe hadn't gotten back yet. Did you know that your Uncle Joe was at the Battle of Midway? And he was eating a piece of my mother's fruitcake when the bombs fell on Pearl Harbor. Well, he wasn't back yet. But there was a barbecue, and we were so grateful. We all went down to the river, and we held hands, and we sang. Shall we gather at the river, where God's have at the words, with its crystal tide forever. And then we went back up. And I remember I was sitting in a rocking chair under that oak tree. I know it sounds corny, but there was a big oak tree. And I had a couple of beers. And then I remember that I got really tired. So I went upstairs in my bedroom. Now, I had never slept in the bed by myself. I had shared that bed with my Uncle Joe, with your Uncle Joe, until we both went into the services. So I was kind of excited to have a bed to myself, and I was kind of excited to have a bed. But that's all I remember. And I remember I was coming down the stairs and Dot ran over to me and she said, Carl, do you know what you did? And I said, no, what did I do? And she said, well, Mom went to wake you up. And when she touched you, you almost choked her to death. I didn't remember doing that. So whenever I went into the bedroom, I made sure I locked the door. Well, Bernie started getting on me. She started saying, isn't Carl going to get a job? When's Carl going to get a job? Why isn't Carl getting a job? I think Carl should get a job. When's Carl going to get his job? And my mother went right up to her. And she put her finger in her face and she said, you leave Carl alone. He's been in a war. He's been through a lot. He needs to have a little fun. And whoo, did I have some fun? Let me tell you. But then one day that fun asked me if she wanted to get, if we were going to get married. And I said, oh no, I'm marrying a girl out to California way. See, I had always intended to marry your mother. And so I wrote to your mother that I was coming out. And I got on the train and I went all the way to Anaheim, California on that train. I'm waiting for my train to come in. I'm waiting for my man to come home. I've cried 1,000 teardrops each live long day. I've walked 1,000 miles since he went away. Oh, I'm waiting for my life to begin. Yes, I'm waiting. I'm waiting. Oh, I'm waiting for the train to come in. Well, your mother, she was waiting for me on the tracks. She had gotten even more beautiful than the first time I saw her. She was just a little bitty thing, no bigger than a minute. And her hair, it waved down to her shoulders, and her skin and her eyes. Were they cornflower blue or spring green? I still didn't tell. Well, I wrapped her up in my arms and then we went back to her house. And as soon as we came in, her mother, Matilda, said, when are you going to marry my daughter? And I said, well, now this is September. I says, how about September? And she says, no, that is too early. I said, okay, well, how about October? No, I have chosen the date of November 5th. So Joe and I looked at one another and we said, all right. And then I wrote my mother and she came out on the train. She wore a blue suit to the wedding, but Matilda wore black. And it was 10 o'clock on November 5th that I walked down the aisle. I was waiting for your mother as she walked down the aisle of St. Thomas Bonaventure Church. She had made her own dress. It was just beautiful. It had lace on the front, and her hair was pinned up, and she had these little pearls in there. She looked so beautiful. She looked so beautiful. And then her pop handed her off to me. And the priest said, well, we said those words that everybody used to say back then. I, Carl Henry Carpenter, take thee, Josephine Agnes Knipe, to be my lawfully wedded wife. I promise to honor, love, and cherish you in sickness and in health for richer, for poorer, as long as we both shall live. Well, you know, Reg, and we had no idea health for richer or for poorer was all going to come true. You know, people say to me, Carl, don't you hate the war? I mean, look what it did to you, made you a cripple. And I always say, no, I don't hate the war. If I hadn't have been in the war, I wouldn't have met your mother. If I hadn't have met your mother, I wouldn't have had you 5 kids. And without you 5 kids and your mother, I would have just been another guy from Clayton looking for a little bit of fun. You had enough of that story, Toots? Because the game's about to come on. All right. I'll see you soon. My daddy was in World War II. Went in at 18, came out at 22. Met my mom in California. Both lived through and blessed the day. Love and war. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Anybody have any response? Anything they'd like to share?
That was beautiful. Thank you.
You're welcome. I want to tell you a little bit about how I got that story from my father. Of course, my father had severe PTSD and would become quite violent. And then, of course, he was 100% disabled from his time in the war. But even though we were deeply impacted by his time in the wars, his time as a soldier, we never really knew the story, right? We never knew the story. I just kind of knew generalities. And so I had been listening to NPR, and they have this wonderful program called the Story Corps. And Story Corps collects veterans' stories. And my father was quite old by then. And I thought, my gosh, I better get my dad's story. And so I started going over to his home, and I would ask him simple little questions. I would never attack it directly. I would say, so Dad, when you're in the war, what'd you have to eat? Oh, Jesus Christ, he'd say. They gave us chocolate bars and these C rations. And in case you're wondering, Reg, C stood for crap. My father is very colorful. And that's kind of how I got into him telling me this story. I would just go over every Friday. I made an appointment, and I would just ask him, and he would tell me just a little piece of it, and I would write it down. And then the next week I'd come, and he'd start at the same place, and he would tell a little bit more, and then I would write it down. And that's how it went until I got all the way through the story with him. And I would bring him music, to help kind of prompt his memory. And mostly I was just patient, patient. And, my dad wasn't a quote unquote hero, but he was to me. So Do any of you have any experience with veterans in your life?
I'm just wondering, at the end, you refer to him being a cripple, and that was just kind of a startling detail. And what did that mean? It
My
covers a
father,
lot of territory.
yeah, my father had his knees started to wear down while he was a soldier, and so his knees, like the kneecaps collapsed, and then there was shrapnel in his legs, and then they went in and they tried to clean it up, and this was before there were knee replacements. And so they decided that they would fuse my father's legs, and so what they did was they cut the knee joint out, and then they made one long, thin, unbending leg bone by fusing the shin bone and the femur bone into one bone. And they did that. They took the ends of the raw bone and they grafted them together by tightening a screw in his leg. So first they did his left leg, and then his right leg went, and they did that on his right leg. And that caused him to have all kinds of balance problems. He all of the muscles in his legs atrophied. Then they had to start cutting his toes off because they thought if they cut his toes off, he would have better balance. And then the muscles in his back started to atrophy. So my father essentially propelled himself around by his arms. He'd pick himself up with his arms like this and kind of turn himself around, but he kind of had clothespins for legs. So they said it was an experiment. Yeah. So he was crippled. So none of you have had any experience with veterans?
Well, my dad was a veteran and he was in Hawaii during World War II, but he never particularly talked about it. And he passed away when I was 20. So I never got the chance to hear the stories. We have pictures though of him on the beach in Hawaii and smoking on ships. And we had pictures of him at the Bikini Atoll. So he was there watching those first atomic bomb explosions. And we sometimes wonder if exposure to that was one of the reasons his life was so short due to cancer.
Right. Well, won't it be a wonderful day when all of us can say none of us know any veterans?
My middle granddaughter has applied to the Air Force Academy. So she
Luck to her.
presumably is going to be a veteran. And I've got an uncle who's a little younger than I am that's head of his VFW post in Punxsutawney, Pennsylvania. So he's a vet, and he was Vietnam and does not like to talk about it.
No.
My father was obviously quite a bit older than your father. He got drafted in 1945, but got lucky. The war ended before he actually was assigned to show up, and they canceled everybody after the treaty was signed. So he never actually went. I had two uncles, his younger brothers, who did see military service. Both lived through it and came back home.
Yeah, these veteran stories are so important,
My grandfather on my mother's side was in Germany. He was a lawyer, and he was behind the front lines, setting up, trying to reestablish civil order as the battlefield moved to the east. He came back without any physical scars as far as I know.
Actually, the other thing I found out about my father after my stepmother died was my sister got all the records, and my father had done his training up at Sampson Base. And when my sister and I went up there, we could find his name in the books and his picture in the pictures up at Sampson. And that was really nice.
My dad was in World War II and he was in the Army Air Corps. He was at a lot of different bases and he learned how to fly. But he never spoke of Hawaii with the exception of remarking that Pearl Harbor, I was born on December 7th, so he used to make comments about that.
Can you imagine how beautiful Hawaii must have been then, before it was all developed?
And he talked about the black sand beaches. That he did talk about it.
Yeah. Well,
Pictures of Diamond Head.
Mhm.
When I
think-
lived in Kentucky, I had a good friend who had grown up in Tennessee. He went in the military. I'm not sure if he got drafted or if he enlisted, but that would be during the Korean War. And he was stationed at Sampson. And he had never been out of Tennessee. He got on a plane somewhere in Tennessee, landed in Sampson, which is near Geneva. And he said, I got off the plane, I looked around, this was January. He said, I never even knew there was that much snow.
Mhm. Mhm. My father was excited. He said, Reg, you could pick oranges off a tree. Because, we don't have a northern New York, we don't have oranges. Yeah, it was really cool.
Well, thank you, Rajni. And
You're very welcome.
story again.
Yeah, thank you all for coming, and I so appreciate. I'm so glad you got to meet my dad. He's
Oh,
quite-
yes. And I cried and I laughed again.
good. Yeah,
Oh,
my
both.
specialty. All right, well, I'm gonna head out. I'll see you guys later.
Oh, thank you again for
Hope
doing
to see
this
ya.
for us.
Happy. Please call me anytime. I'd love to come back.
Will do. It's
Take
nice,
care.
nice to see you all and have a good week here. To see you soon.